As the slap echoed through the cabin, passengers fell silent, their gazes fixed on Sophia, whose cheek burned red. Madison's arrogant smirk quickly faded as Sophia reached into her modest purse, pulling out her phone with steady hands. "Hello, darling," Sophia spoke softly, her voice a calm storm. "There's been an incident on Flight 227. Passengers exchanged curious glances as Madison's face turned pale. Who are you calling?" she stammered. Sophia's lips curled into a serene smile. "My husband, Daniel Harris." The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Eyes widened, whispers rippled through the cabin. Madison's knees buckled as the truth washed over her. Sophia wasn't just a humble housemaid. She was married to the owner of the airline. "Ma'am," a voice crackled over the intercom, "please instruct the flight attendant to cooperate. We've been informed by Mr. Harris himself." Two security personnel appeared at the front of the cabin, their professional demeanor adding weight to the unfolding scene. Madison's world collapsed as passengers, once indifferent, now looked at her with a mix of disdain and pity. The balance of power had shifted entirely, and the once untouchable flight attendant was about to be escorted off the plane. Sophia sat back, her calm restored. She had no need for revenge. Her dignity and the truth had spoken loud enough. Justice, served in silence, had never been sweeter. Thank you so much for watching. If this story captivated you, please drop a 1 in the comments. Your thoughts mean the world to us. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories. See you in the next one. The early morning light bathed Los Angeles International Airport in a hazy golden glow. Travelers shuffled through bustling terminals, their rolling luggage clattering over polished floors. Among them was Sophia Harris, a woman in her mid-30s with a quiet demeanor and a modest appearance. Her simple cotton dress and worn leather purse did little to distinguish her from the crowd, yet there was an air of calm confidence about her as she approached the boarding gate for Flight 227 to New York City. Sophia moved with practiced ease, her steps unhurried. She had learned long ago not to rush, not to draw attention to herself. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore no makeup, only a light gloss that caught the morning light. She handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, who barely glanced at her before waving her through to the jet bridge. Once inside the plane, Sophia made her way to her business class seat. The cushioned seat and extra legroom felt like a rare luxury, but she settled in without fanfare. She placed her small purse neatly under the seat in front of her and leaned back, allowing herself a moment of peace. Her quiet demeanor stood in stark contrast to the bustling energy of Madison Blake, the senior flight attendant. Madison, in her early 40s, had a sharp, practiced smile and a uniform that fit her like a glove. Her dark hair was perfectly pinned, and her every movement was precise and controlled. She moved through the cabin with the air of someone who not only knew the rules, but had written a few of them herself. Behind Madison, Ethan Brooks adjusted his designer watch as he stored his luggage in the overhead compartment. He wore a tailored suit and exuded the confidence of a man used to being in charge. He cast a quick, appraising glance at Sophia, his expression unreadable. Across the aisle, Isabella Grant, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, offered Sophia a small, welcoming smile. The business class cabin filled with passengers dressed in tailored suits and elegant dresses, each one seemingly in competition to display their wealth. The soft hum of conversation mixed with the rustle of newspapers and the quiet clink of ice in crystal glasses. Sophia remained still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wasn't new to this kind of environment, but it wasn't often that she indulged in such comfort. She had chosen business class for this particular flight, and it felt like a small gift to herself, a moment of quiet before the storm of obligations waiting for her in New York. As Madison walked through the aisle, her sharp eyes scanned each passenger. Her expression remained professional until she reached Sophia. The practiced smile faded slightly, replaced by a flicker of doubt. She hesitated, then leaned over, her voice a mix of politeness and underlying skepticism. "Excuse me, ma'am," Madison said, her tone clipped. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Sophia looked up, her expression calm. "Yes, this is my seat." She reached into her purse and handed Madison her boarding pass. Madison took the pass, her manicured fingers clutching it tighter than necessary. Her eyes darted over the ticket, and she frowned as if trying to find an error. Everything was in order, seat 3A, business class. She returned the pass, her lips forming a thin line. "All right, then," Madison said, the words forced through a polite mask. She turned sharply, her posture stiff as she moved on to the next passenger. Sophia exhaled softly, slipping the boarding pass back into her purse. She had seen the look in Madison's eyes before, the kind that measured worth based on appearances, that decided who belonged and who didn't. She turned her gaze to the window, watching as the last of the luggage was loaded onto the plane. Ethan, who had been watching the exchange, leaned over to Madison as she passed. "Everything all right?" he murmured, just loud enough for Sophia to hear. "Yes," Madison replied, her voice flat. "Just a seating check." Isabella shot Madison a pointed look but said nothing. Instead, she offered Sophia another gentle smile, as if to say, "I see you." Sophia returned the smile, a small gesture of gratitude. She knew this flight would be a long one, but she had no idea just how much longer it was about to feel. The plane had reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign flicked off with a soft chime. Passengers settled into their seats, flipping through magazines and scrolling on their devices. Madison moved through the business class cabin, offering drinks and attending to requests. Her smile remained pleasant, but whenever her gaze landed on Sophia, a shadow of irritation crossed her face. Sophia sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't ask for anything, not a drink, not a blanket, not even a menu. She appeared content, almost serene, but something about her still bothered Madison. The simplicity of her presence seemed to unsettle the flight attendant, as if Sophia's quiet confidence challenged the unwritten rules of who belonged in business class. When Madison offered Sophia a glass of water, the gesture was sharp, more of a motion to dismiss than to serve. "There you go," she said, her tone devoid of warmth. Sophia accepted the glass with a polite nod. "Thank you." A few rows back, Ethan watched the exchange with a smirk. He leaned slightly toward Madison as she passed him again. "You know," he murmured, "I'm not sure she's supposed to be here. Maybe she grabbed someone else's seat?" Madison's lips pressed into a thin line. "I was thinking the same thing," she replied under her breath. Isabella, who had been quietly observing, shifted in her seat. She caught Madison's eye and spoke just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I've flown business class for years," she said smoothly, "and I've never seen a flight attendant ask where someone bought their ticket." Her tone was gentle, but the edge in her words was unmistakable. Madison's jaw tightened, but she forced a thin smile. "Just following protocol." Isabella offered Sophia another reassuring smile, and for a moment Madison hesitated. But the doubt passed quickly, replaced by a determination that made her posture even stiffer. The atmosphere in the cabin grew tense. Madison's polite demeanor had hardened into something colder. When Sophia stood up to head to the restroom, Madison stepped in front of her, blocking her path with an immovable presence. "Where are you going?" Madison asked, her voice sharp. Sophia blinked, taken aback by the sudden confrontation. "To the restroom." "The business class restroom is for business class passengers only," Madison said, folding her arms tightly across her chest. A few heads turned. Passengers pretended not to listen, but their curiosity was palpable. "I am a business class passenger," Sophia replied, her voice steady. Madison let out a breathy laugh. "If you're more comfortable using the economy restroom, I can make an exception." Sophia's expression remained unchanged. "I paid for this seat. I have just as much right to use this restroom as anyone else." The air between them thickened. Madison's smile turned cold. "That's interesting, because I've never seen someone in business class without a single luxury item on them. No watch, no jewelry, just a simple dress. A murmur rippled through the nearby seats. Isabella let out a quiet scoff, but held her tongue. Sophia met Madison's gaze, unshaken. "I didn't know my outfit needed your approval to use the restroom." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. Ethan looked away, suddenly very interested in his tablet. Isabella's expression grew more concerned, but she remained silent, her disapproval evident. Madison stepped aside, but not without a final glare. "Enjoy your flight," she said, her voice laced with disdain. Sophia returned to her seat, a quiet storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. She had faced this kind of judgment before, but this felt different, more personal. The hostility in Madison's eyes was not just about class or status. It was about power, the kind that came from a uniform and a badge, wielded carelessly and without consequence. When the call light above Sophia's seat lit up, Madison appeared almost instantly. "Yes?" she asked, her voice overly sweet. "Did you need something?" Sophia looked up, genuinely confused. "I didn't press the call button." Madison's smile didn't falter. "Well, it's on. If you don't need assistance, please be mindful not to press buttons you don't understand." A few passengers turned their heads, their interest piqued. Isabella let out a soft laugh, a sound more pointed than cheerful. "That's interesting," she said, her tone light but her words sharp. "I've been watching her. She hasn't moved a muscle. Are you sure the button wasn't pressed by accident from somewhere else?" Madison's fingers tightened around the tray in her hands. "I don't make mistakes," she said smoothly, her voice barely above a whisper. Sophia's expression remained serene. "I didn't press it," she said, her words firm yet calm. Madison leaned in slightly, her face so close Sophia could smell the mint on her breath. "Next time, just be careful," she said, her voice a quiet threat. She turned off the call light and moved away, but her presence lingered like a shadow. Sophia exhaled slowly, her patience thinning. The tension in the cabin had not dissipated. If anything, it had thickened, the air heavy with unspoken words and wary glances. Isabella leaned slightly toward Sophia. "She's got a problem with you, and she's not even trying to hide it." Sophia nodded but remained quiet. There was nothing she could say to change Madison's mind, nothing that would diffuse the quiet hostility that had settled over the cabin. But deep down, Sophia knew that Madison was waiting for her to make a mistake, to give her a reason to escalate this conflict further. And somehow Sophia also knew that the flight attendant wouldn't have to wait long. Sophia sat still, her composure like a fortress, but the quiet murmurs around her and the sharp, lingering glances from Madison weighed heavily on the air. The atmosphere had become a tightrope, one wrong step away from unraveling completely. She needed to use the restroom, but after the last encounter, she hesitated. Still, there was only so much patience she could muster. She stood, moving with the same quiet grace as before, slipping into the aisle. Her steps were soft, almost hesitant, but her chin remained lifted. She approached the restroom door, her hand just reaching for the handle, when Madison appeared again, materializing from the galley like a shadow. "Where do you think you're going?" Madison's voice cut through the hum of the cabin, sharp and cold. Sophia blinked, her hand still on the handle. "I need to use the restroom." Madison stepped closer, blocking the door with her body. "This restroom is for business-class passengers only," she said, each word a dagger. A few heads turned, curiosity mingled with discomfort. The passengers watched, some pretending not to, but none truly able to look away. "I am a business-class passenger," Sophia replied, her voice calm but edged with steel. Madison let out a short, bitter laugh. "You don't belong here. You've made everyone uncomfortable since you boarded. Maybe you should go back to where you belong." Before Sophia could respond, Madison's hand shot out. The slap echoed through the cabin, a sharp, unnatural sound that silenced everything else. The entire plane seemed to hold its breath. Sophia's head turned slightly with the force of the blow, her cheek blooming red, but she did not recoil, she did not stagger. Instead, she turned back to face Madison, her expression as still as a calm lake. Passengers gasped. A man dropped his glass, and the soft thud of it hitting the carpet went unnoticed under the weight of the silence. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth, and even Ethan, who had once fed into Madison's suspicions, sat motionless, his expression a mix of shock and shame. Madison's hand remained frozen in the air, her face a mask of horror as if she only now understood what she had done. The confidence that had carried her through every aisle, through every haughty glance and judgmental whisper, shattered. Her breath came in shallow bursts, and her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Sophia did not touch her burning cheek. She did not flinch. Instead, with the same deliberate calm, she reached into her small leather purse and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved steadily, unlocking the screen and dialing a number without hesitation. Each button press was a quiet rebellion, a declaration of control. She raised the phone to her ear. "Hello, darling," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I need your help. There's been an incident on Flight 227. Madison's expression shifted from horror to panic. The shift was almost imperceptible, but the passengers closest to her saw it. Her knees seemed to wobble, the weight of her mistake settling heavily on her shoulders. Sophia remained unshaken. "Yes, I'm fine," she continued into the phone. "A flight attendant just slapped me." A ripple of disbelief moved through the cabin. Isabella's eyes widened, and a man a few rows back whispered to his seatmate, the words lost in the hush, but their tone unmistakable. Madison's mouth finally moved. Who are you calling?" Sophia did not lower the phone. "My husband," she said simply, and the silence deepened. "Daniel Harris." The name hung in the air, heavy and electric. It took a moment for the gravity of the revelation to sink in, but when it did, it hit with the force of a tidal wave. Daniel Harris. The Daniel Harris. The owner of the airline. The man whose name was on every badge, every uniform, every safety card tucked into the seatbacks. A visible shudder ran through Madison. Her fingers twitched at her sides, and the color drained from her face. The authority she had wielded so freely was now a crumbling facade. Her uniform, once a symbol of control, now felt like a noose tightening around her neck. Sophia continued to speak into the phone, her words calm and measured. "Yes, love. I'm on Flight 227 business class. The situation has gotten out of hand. Can you handle it from there?" The call ended, and Sophia slipped the phone back into her purse. She took a step forward, and Madison instinctively moved back, her control over the situation completely unraveled. The passengers who had once judged Sophia with quiet curiosity now looked at Madison with something darker. Disgust, disbelief, even pity. Madison opened her mouth, a desperate attempt to claw back some semblance of authority. I didn't know. I thought..." Sophia's eyes met hers, cool and unyielding. "You thought I didn't belong here." Madison's lips quivered. There was no mistake," Sophia said, her voice cutting through the excuses before they could form. "The only mistake was yours." A soft chime interrupted them, and the captain's voice filled the cabin, his tone even but firm. "Miss Madison Blake, please report to the cockpit immediately." Madison did not move. Her legs seemed to lock beneath her, the gravity of her situation holding her in place. Two security personnel had appeared at the front of the cabin, their expressions professionally blank, but their presence spoke volumes. Sophia stepped aside, giving Madison the path forward. The flight attendant's feet finally moved, though each step seemed to drag her deeper into the reality she had created. As she passed, passengers turned away, not out of respect, but to avoid seeing the slow-motion collapse of a person who had believed herself untouchable. Isabella reached out, gently brushing Sophia's hand as she passed. "Are you okay?" Sophia nodded. "I am, thank you." Ethan sat motionless, his face pale, his earlier arrogance now a crumpled hollow shell. The silence in the cabin had transformed, no longer a waiting hush, but the calm before the storm's final crash. As Madison disappeared into the cockpit, Sophia returned to her seat, her every movement a quiet reclaiming of space. She settled back, buckled her seatbelt, and looked out the window as if nothing had happened, as if the plane had not just flown through a storm of its own making. The balance of power had shifted entirely, and Madison's world had crumbled beneath the weight of her own prejudice. The door to the cockpit closed behind Madison with a soft click, but inside the atmosphere was anything but soft. The captain, a middle-aged man with a steady demeanor, stood with his arms crossed over his chest. His expression was unreadable, but the tightness around his eyes spoke volumes. Next to him, a small communication screen displayed the stern face of an executive from the airline's headquarters. "Madison Blake," the executive's voice came through, cool and precise. "We have been informed of an incident involving a passenger. Can you confirm?" Madison's voice, so strong in the cabin, faltered. "It was a misunderstanding. The passenger, she was causing a disturbance, and I may have overreacted." The captain's expression hardened. "Overreacted? You struck a passenger. Do you understand the gravity of this situation?" Her breath came in shallow gasps. I didn't know who she was." "It doesn't matter who she was," the executive interrupted. "You are a representative of this airline. Your conduct is inexcusable. Effective immediately, you are removed from duty for the remainder of this flight. Upon landing, security will escort you off the plane. You will face a disciplinary review, and given the circumstances, I strongly advise you to prepare a formal statement." Madison's legs wobbled, and she gripped the edge of a control panel to steady herself. "Please, I've worked for this airline for years. I've never—" "Your service record will be taken into account during the review," the executive said sharply. "But the evidence is clear. Mr. Harris himself has instructed us to handle this swiftly and thoroughly." The captain nodded toward the door. "You should return to your seat, Madison, while you still have one." Madison felt a cold wave wash over her. She managed a stiff nod, turned, and opened the door. The walk back to the business class cabin felt like traversing a mile-long plank. Each step drew her closer to the reality she had created. In the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted. Passengers sat in an uneasy quiet, eyes darting to and away from Madison as she passed. Isabella's expression was calm but distant, a quiet disappointment written in the lines of her face. Ethan, who had once whispered against Sophia, now sat with his head bowed, his shoulders hunched under the weight of his own guilt. Sophia remained seated, her focus on the window. She did not turn to look at Madison, and somehow, that silence cut deeper than any words could have. It was not an act of victory, but of finality, a reminder that Madison had already lost. The plane descended, the engines rumbling as they approached the runway. The familiar ding signaled that it was time to fasten seatbelts, but Madison barely registered it. Her mind spun with 1,000 incomplete thoughts, each one slipping away before she could grasp it. She had believed herself untouchable, but now, with each inch closer to the ground, she felt the earth open beneath her. The landing was smooth, but for Madison it felt like a crash. The seatbelt sign turned off and passengers rose, retrieving bags and stretching stiff limbs. Madison remained still, her hands gripping the armrests. At the front of the plane, 2 uniformed security officers stood just beyond the glass of the jet bridge, their presence a silent promise that her ordeal was far from over. When the main cabin door opened, a low murmur swept through the passengers. Madison rose slowly, her movements mechanical. She walked to the door, the aisle parting around her like the Red Sea, each step drawing her deeper into the inevitable. Beyond the door, Daniel Harris stood waiting. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and his expression held none of the warmth that might soften the blow. His voice was quiet but firm. "Ms. Blake, I presume?" Madison swallowed hard. "Mr. Harris?" He raised a hand, silencing her. "There is nothing you can say that will change what happened. You struck my wife, you humiliated her, and you did so with a clear abuse of your authority." Tears pricked the corners of Madison's eyes. "I didn't know. I thought—" "What you thought is irrelevant," he said. "Your actions were not just unprofessional but dangerous. You are terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. Any further actions, including potential legal consequences, will be determined after the disciplinary review." Her world narrowed to a pinprick. "Please, His expression remained unchanged. "You should have considered the consequences before you acted. Now you will live with them." With a small nod to the security officers, Daniel Harris turned away, his presence like a storm receding into the distance. Madison felt the weight of his words settle over her, heavier than any burden she had ever carried. As she was led through the airport, the bustling crowds moved around her, oblivious to the wreckage of her life. Her career, her reputation, her sense of self, all of it lay shattered on the polished floors of the terminal. And somewhere behind her, in the cabin she had once ruled over, Sophia sat quietly, her dignity intact, and her victory as silent as the fall of a curtain on Madison's final act. Madison's steps echoed through the terminal as security officers flanked her on either side. The bustling airport, filled with travelers and the constant hum of movement, seemed oblivious to the collapse of her world. Each step felt heavier than the last, dragging her deeper into a reality she never imagined. She had walked these halls countless times, her uniform a symbol of authority and respect. Now it felt like a prison shroud, a reminder of the arrogance that had cost her everything. She kept her head down, avoiding the curious glances and quiet whispers. Her mind raced, replaying every choice, every harsh word, every cold stare she had thrown at Sophia. She had believed herself untouchable, yet here she was, stripped of her rank, her career, and her dignity. The consequences of her prejudice and unchecked pride had become a chain dragging her down. Behind her, in the glass-walled terminal, Sophia stood with Daniel at her side. She hadn't followed to watch Madison's humiliation. She didn't need to. Her strength had always been in her restraint, her quiet power. She held Daniel's hand, their fingers intertwined in a gesture of unity and calm. As Madison was led away, Sophia met her eyes for the briefest of moments. There was no gloating, no satisfaction, just a quiet acknowledgement that the story had ended exactly as it should. Daniel's hand tightened around Sophia's, his expression gentle. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, her voice steady. "Yes, I am." As they turned,